Ukraine and Russia both fire anywhere from like 4 to 8,000 artillery shells a day. So, like right now, that's where the biggest shortage is, and that's why I always talk about. If you're talking about companies, you're talking about General Dynamics makes a lot of those. They have a plant already in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, that makes them, and they're building a new plant in Texas. I forget where in Texas, but they have, they also make propellants, charges, all that kind of stuff. And the military spent, I did write this down, $1.5 billion to produce 100,000 of these. They want to be able to make 100,000 artillery, 155 millimeter artillery shells a month by 2028. Right now, by next spring, we'll be making 57,000. So we're about halfway where we want to be in terms of artillery shell production. So there's a $1.5 billion funding initiative to get new plants up and start getting these things out.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Angel Research Podcast. My name is Jason Freert, and once again, I'm here with another Jason. So only Jason's here. Jason Simpkins. Welcome back to the show.
Love to be here.
So let's jump right into it. It's October 12th, and there's a war in Israel.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say? Or it's not really a war, I guess. There's no real wars anymore.
It does seem kind of either lopsided or a bit of a gray area, right? Because it's not like Palestine is an official state with its own standing army. They have a governing, organization, which is Hamas. They have a political party / terrorist organization that governs them.
Right.
And so, but they are technically in control of that area that's blockaded. It's often referred to as an open-air prison. It's kind of cut off from the outside world. And then we had that really horrific attack last weekend, which you just knew was going to be a problem, and Israel is gearing up to it looks like really kind of level the whole Gaza Strip.
Yeah, that it does seem like it's going to be pretty bad. I have not, when I heard there was an attack and they're like, oh, they're calling up people like from the military, because in Israel basically everybody's in the military.
Right, everybody's required, yeah.
Everybody's in for 2 years, and then after that you're basically like the entire country's in the reserves.
Yeah, you're on call, yeah.
So they have, they are a small country, but they have, a lot more soldiers and military capability than whoever they're trying to go against.
Yeah, the Gaza Strip, just for context there, is about 140 square miles. That is about the same as Mobile, Alabama. So, except whereas Mobile, Alabama has about 270,000 or so people living it, the Gaza Strip has more than 2 million.
Right.
So it's a lot of people packed into a very small area, and like I said, they've been cut off by that Israeli blockade for a long time, which is why you have a lot of this resentment and kind of what leads to this. But again, and that's not to lay blame on anybody. There's a reason it was blockaded in the first place, right? Everyone you talk to, we all know, we've all been living with this issue our entire lives. We all grew up with it. We all know that this Israel-Palestine conflict, this whole thing with just Israel and Iran, that it's a problem, and it's what I call the world's least solvable problem. It's been this thing that we've been trying to just kind of deal with and gloss over and move on from for the past 75 to 100 years, and it just doesn't seem like we're going to be able to do that. It just seems like right now is the time where it's really coming to a head, and where we're going to see some really, really, really ugly stuff.
Yeah, I was, when I first heard about it, and they were like, oh, 1,000 rockets, I had no context. I was like, is that a lot for what? Because my understanding is like there's rocket attacks like on the regular over there, and bombings and stuff like that. Has it been relatively tame, and then this just sort of set it off, or just the sheer scale of this is not typically what they're seeing?
Right. Yeah. So Israel's accustomed to a certain number of rocket attacks. I couldn't tell you how many it fields a day. I mean, it obviously varies, but they're typically, they got the Iron Dome there,
Right.
so that's why it's there, and it's extremely effective in terms of taking this stuff down. And it seems like Hamas finally got the idea of being like, okay, well, we're going to stockpile a bunch of rockets and we're going to fire them over there all at once and do an actual coordinated attack. And I mean, it really was coordinated. We talk about combined arms, air, land, and sea power, where they have, breaches of the barriers and walls on the ground, where they're coming around, the ocean, where they're flying over in motorized paragliders, and they
Yeah,
coordinate
I
with this
saw
massive
those.
rocket
There's
attack.
basically they're in parachutes with industrial fans strapped to
pretty
their
much. Yeah, very
backs.
crude but effective instruments.
Right,
Yeah.
and so they shot rockets while also sending that.
Right. It was very coordinated. It was very targeted. It was like they had their targets. They apparently constructed like a mock Israeli settlement within the Gaza Strip and were practicing on that. And that's why so many fingers on this and so many people are kind of turned an eye toward Iran, because Iran is Hamas's biggest benefactor. They give them about $100 million a year. They give them weapons. It was Iran that first supplied Hamas with the know-how and the materials needed to make suicide vests. That was back in the 1990s when they were having the Oslo peace talks, where they were trying to, again, bridge this divide. And those talks ended up failing. They went on for like the entirety of the Clinton administration, all the way to the year 2000, and they failed. And one of the reasons they failed was because you had this terrorist organization, basically making peace impossible. And again, I'm not going to blame any one side, because, again, as adults, I think we all understand that there's a very clearly enough blame to go around in this entire situation. And there are reasons on the Israeli side as to why they haven't been open to peace talks in certain capacities and why they draw their lines where they draw their lines. So it's not to, put all the blame on Palestine and just saying, oh, there's a bunch of militants just going off the deep end. I mean, it's been back and forth for a while now, but it was the coordination of this attack. Even for what you would call their level of sophistication that we're not really used to seeing from that group, that they're not typically capable of. But we do know, again, Iran's been giving them the money. Typically, this stuff kind of comes through tunnels, either from the north, which is Lebanon, and that's where Hezbollah, another Iranian-backed military organization, terrorist group, operates out of, and they've even started attacking Israel a little bit now. They've been going back and forth these past few days, so now they're getting involved. And then to the south is Egypt, and Egypt has done, they made, I think, a pretty good effort at shutting down the underground tunnels that were feeding into the Gaza Strip, and they also apparently gave Israeli intelligence warnings that something was going to happen, and those warnings were apparently dismissed.
Yeah, that seems to be, there's some a little suspect about the whole situation, given, like you said, the sophistication of Israeli intelligence is known to be
it's impeccable.
Legit.
It's among the best in the world.
The Mossad is
only behind the United States, almost certainly.
So the fact that this was planned for a year, and they supposedly built a mock city, they don't know about this,
right? And they had to have trained with these they didn't just get into these motorized paragliders and do this stuff and land in exactly where they're supposed to land and execute this without training somewhere else. And so that's why they think that these militants, a lot of them left the country through probably these underground tunnels, probably snuck out by Iran or Hezbollah or whoever, and they maybe practiced and trained a little bit outside of the country and then came back in and executed it. And that's a scary thought, too, because, and again, one of the things that happened with the United States is, we immediately started sending, carrier fleets and stuff closer and over. And, that's really not a warning to, the Palestinians, because they got their hands full with the Israelis, but it's so that Iran stays out of it.
Right.
And so now it's going to be a matter of, do they stay out of it? Who else? If now we've got Hamas and Hezbollah dipping its toe in, and you have these other militant groups that are located all over there, and Iran has a ton of proxy groups throughout the region, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Yemen, where they're fighting Saudi Arabia. They've really kind of, it's really chaotic throughout the region, in part because Iran funds so many of these terrorist organizations and proxy groups and militants, and the whole goal is really to make the situation untenable for Israel. And so there's a question of who's going to attack them. If Israel goes full force into the Gaza Strip and they're all focused over there, do any of these other military groups start storming in behind? From the north, again with Hezbollah, like what's next? Does Iran get involved? And that's a big kind of question. And if they do, then obviously, it's all but certain that the United States would at that point,
right? And that's, I guess, the bigger question that people in the U.S. or just really that are outside of the Middle East are concerned, because we have obviously the Russia-Ukraine situation,
right.
And is this the reason this attack was sort of done now because everybody's sort of distracted with there, or Iran now has funds since they sort of, I guess, got their sanctions loosened.
So
after Trump basically canceled their deal, and now they're back to, not less sanctions, I guess, because oil prices went up and we want some of that oil. Like, there's a lot of moving parts here.
Right. Well, I mean, Iran is gonna Iran. They're gonna have oil money, and you really touched on a lot of things there. So I'm gonna have to cut these up. But so first with the timing, the most suspicious thing about the timing is that the U.S. has been trying to broker this deal to normalize relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel, which would be a nice step for them because not many countries in that region formally acknowledge Israel. I think Jordan does, going back maybe to the 1970s. There's a few in there that do. Saudi Arabia would be probably the biggest and most influential Middle Eastern country.
A lot of the countries, Iran in particular, are just like, yeah, we want to destroy all Jews, basically.
Yeah, I mean,
we want to wipe them off the map.
And
it's again, this seems kind of threatening
and that's where you get the hardliners on both positions. There are a lot of Israeli hardliners that think the only solution to this problem is killing all the Palestinians, is genocide on their side. And then at the same time, you've got these other militants on the fundamentalist side of Iran or of basically the Muslim world, which believe that Israel has to be eradicated. So it's very much like a zero-sum game going on over there. But a big thing is too, if Saudi Arabia acknowledges Israel as a state, that gives it more legitimacy, and a kind of legitimacy that Iran certainly doesn't want it to have. Now, does that mean necessarily that Iran staged this attack to happen at this juncture, at this moment, that they told Hamas to do it? Not necessarily. Hamas could have just reached this own conclusion independently. They're probably angry at this potential U.S. Saudi Arabia Israel deal for the same reasons Iran is. They probably saw the writing on the wall there too.
Well, and if it took them an entire year to plan this, clearly, it's not just hey, you guys are doing this one thing, I'm pissed off, I'm going to run over. It was clearly
the negotiations
for
for that have been going on for years, at least since the beginning of the Biden administration. They've been trying to, and the United States and Saudi Arabia have been buddying up for a while now. There have been a lot of arms deals. With this new one, there's talk of a defense pact. They want nuclear technology, nuclear power technology from the United States. There's a lot of things they want from us. And again, starting with weapons to combat Iran and Yemen and the proxies and this whole proxy war they've been fighting in Yemen and other places in the region. And like I said, we just talked about how active Iran has been, especially putting roots ever since, the United States left Iraq and Afghanistan. Iran's flooded into that power vacuum. So that's a lot of regional power balance going on, with Israel just sitting as this giant elephant in the room. And so the reality is now, though, it puts Saudi Arabia in a position where they can't, make a positive step towards Israel if Israel is rolling over the Gaza Strip in tanks. It's just not gonna sit. They come out and they are one of these countries that doesn't really condemn the terrorist attack of a week ago. They're not gonna say Israel's right and whoa, everybody leave Israel alone. They're not gonna do that. So that puts them in a different situation. However, what I will say, and this too is important, because when you talk about Russia, yes, this is absolutely a huge win for Russia, because it draws attention and it draws resources from the West away from Ukraine to this other issue, which for the right now is kind of like the biggest issue in the world all of a sudden. And this has been part of like kind of my overall theory on this, which is that basically we've been fighting World War III for the past 15 years. So, and what I mean by that is if you go back around 15 years into like late 2000s, you start to find that these countries, particularly Iran, China, and Russia, have reasons to be increasingly antagonistic towards the United States. One reason, so like at the same time, if you think back to that time, we had our wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, which initially looked like, oh, okay, well, 9/11 happened, and so they're retaliating. But then as it went on, it became like, this is really just kind of a war of choice and an occupation, and there's no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, like he said. And this now just looks like you guys stomping around and imposing your will and trying to get like cheap oil or install a friendly regime in Iraq. This is nothing like what you said. This is American imperialism by any other name. And we, Iran, Russia, and China, want to know why you're allowed to do that and we're not. That hurt and undermined U.S. credibility on the world stage in that way. Similarly, the economic collapse of 2008, that kind of undermined the U.S.'s role as the central pillar of the global economy. That's when a lot of this talk about getting away from the U.S. dollar as the global reserve currency and start implementing a global reserve like the SDR, or they started having more currency swaps between themselves so they wouldn't have to exchange for dollars to get trade. And it was like, why does America have this oversized influence in the global economy when they have just about driven it to the brink of ruin? Why on the world stage is America allowed to do whatever they want, but then whenever we want to do something that's even vaguely imperialistic, we get problem for it? The other thing kind of happened is with all three of those countries, you look at the sanctions. So China has been sanctioned for its human rights abuses and for spying. Russia has been sanctioned for invading Ukraine not once, but twice. First in 2014 when they annexed Crimea, and now when they tried it again last year to go for the whole thing. Iran's been sanctioned over its nuclear program. So now you've got these three global economic pariahs that have been effectively kind of driven into each other's arms. Like they were already interested in what each other had to say because what they all had to say was anti-America. It was all anti-West. It was like we have to undo this global order that is stifling us and giving America and Europe free rein to do whatever the hell they want while we sit on the sidelines and have to play by their rules. Now here we are with our laboring under these sanctions together. So that's where you get now this cooperation between the three. Russia and Iran work together developing energy infrastructure. Russia invested something like $40 billion in an Iranian gas project like just last year. We saw Iranian drones being deployed in Ukraine by Russia. We see Russian military technology popping up in Iran. We see oil from both Russia and Iran, who have their energy sector sanctioned, going to China. So you have this triumvirate of countries that really at this point hate us and have been waging kind of a soft war. And you see it with again Ukraine. You saw it first in Georgia when Russia invaded Georgia in 2008. And then when they went and said, okay, that was actually pretty effective, now we're going to do that again in Ukraine, you see it in China in the way they're acting in the South China Sea and threatening Taiwan. And now you're seeing it Iran and their proxies launch, an extremely aggressive and dramatic attack on Israel that hasn't happened in decades. I mean, we've seen some flare-ups over the past bit, but I can't think of a time, at least in my lifetime, where things were this bad and things got this brutal. So you have this kind of ugly axis of I guess what George W. Bush kind of referred to as the axis of evil.
Yeah.
That
I don't think China was involved.
I don't think they were in it either.
But it does seem like it is setting up perfectly for China to go and take Taiwan.
Yeah.
Because how, maybe not this year, or I even think someone over there basically gave a date of 2026. Basically,
yeah.
These people are they're telling people what they're going to do.
Yes.
But they just do it over and over in a very provocative way, and then they just take their time, and then people are like, oh, they're not really going to do it. They keep saying that, and then they actually do it.
Right.
Like,
it's
what?
almost like you think they're bluffing, but they're not. And what we saw, one of the, big kind of failures of that Obama presidency ended up being that Iran deal because, the whole thing was like, hey, you know what? Maybe if we negotiate, maybe if we give them a carrot and not just the stick, we can get through this logjam. And I mean, in their defense, invading Iraq and Afghanistan didn't solve anything either. It just made things work. So you're only going to get so far with military force and intervention. And you get to that point where it's like, okay, you knocked a country down. What are you going to do to build it back up? And in our case, we said nothing, leave. But like, if you're not going to go that route, it's like, okay, well, maybe we'll try the diplomatic route. Well, that didn't work either because these countries are so committed to their long-term objectives. In Iran's case, obliterating and ultimately getting rid of Israel. In China's case, establishing itself as at least if not the principal superpower in the world, and at least, it's kind of its own sole superpower in its hemisphere, free of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, free of U.S. intervention in that Pacific region at the very least. And then Russia wants the freedom to effectively rebuild the Soviet Union. So these things, they're clearly not willing to give up on them. Not Vladimir Putin, not Xi Jinping, not, the Ayatollah. These are the objectives. This is what they want, and this is what they're doing.
Yeah, so I've always kind of been of the opinion that I agree with you, this is basically World War III.
It is.
But it's fought in a way that is not traditional, like storming the beach in Normandy style.
Right, it's kind of like a pseudo-warfare.
Cyber attacks, and like you said, cyber attacks all the time, proxy wars, and supplying. I mean, we're all but fighting the war against Russia except for the manpower.
Right.
So the question is this going to escalate to the point where Americans actually get involved, or is it going to sort of stay like this until I guess one or more of these countries basically collapse, which I think is basically the U.S. strategy is they want Russia to basily collapse.
And
they
Russia's
want a
on the
coup.
verge.
They want a coup there. But that also doesn't necessarily mean that whoever takes over.
It doesn't mean you're going to get a better alternative, like some liberal progressive thinker is going to come in and replace Vladimir Putin to take over the Russian oligarchy. Yeah. No, it's going to be another scumbag. It was almost Prigozhin, that's the thing. And Russia is obviously in a bad way. I don't think people realize the extent to which they are just abjectly failing in Ukraine. And like we did see it in July with Prigozhin's kind of mini rebellion. And I mean, I was shocked he didn't go through with it because I'm like, you're in for a penny, you're in for a pound, dude. Like, once you got the tank column and you're heading to Moscow, like, stopping halfway and turning around is not an option.
You saw how it ended.
Yeah, you saw how it ended for him.
He died in a plane crash.
Yeah, but it's not like he was a good guy. It's not like he was like, it's all right, everybody, I'm going to reclaim Russia for the people. He was like, no, I want to be the thug that runs the show.
Yeah.
Like, everybody wants to be the thug that runs the show.
So all this stuff is taking place not on the U.S. shores, but obviously U.S. Military budget and companies are heavily involved. How much of that now is, how much of the budget is actually sort of making its way overseas, or are these like additional line items that are getting? Because it seems like basically when we're saying, hey, we're sending X dollars to Ukraine, it's not really that. It's not like we're sending cash. Like a lot of times it's like we're sending like 15 tanks that are worth X amount, and now we need to restock our tanks, so we're going to get the brand new tanks over here.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. So, like, a lot of times, with Ukraine, you have to break out the aid because, they're also sending, food and medical supplies and humanitarian aid. It means financing Ukraine's debts so that they can stay solvent as a country and, continue to borrow or whatever. Like that's the kind of funding that is most of it. I will say this: of the overall U.S. budget, foreign aid accounts for 1%. Of the defense budget, this stuff is usually carved out and separate. The defense budget is at a record high $858 billion. It's going to continue to go up because of what we saw last year with the Ukraine invasion and what we're seeing right now and what we see in the future with China. Like I said, we're seeing the past, present, and future conflict all happen at once here. So that's all going to happen. A lot of it is sending out old stuff that we don't use anymore. Like recent stuff that's gone out, like cluster bombs. They're things that we don't really rely on anymore. We have more precision munitions, better long range munitions. We don't really need cluster bombs so much anymore. We're sending F-16s because we have F-35s. We can move out Abrams or whatever.
It's basically just a big yard sale.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, and it's just kind of moving this stuff over. It's arms transfers. It's sending the big thing is like 155 millimeter artillery shells because they're burning through. Russia expended about 10 million artillery shells last year. These like Ukraine and Russia both fire anywhere from like 4,000 to 8,000 artillery shells a day. So like right now, that's where the biggest shortage is. And that's why I always talk about, if you're talking about companies, you're talking about General Dynamics makes a lot of those. They have a plant already in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania that makes them, and they're building a new plant in Texas. I forget where in Texas. But they have, they also make propellants, charges, all that kind of stuff. And the military spent, I did write this down, $1.5 billion to produce 100,000 of these. They want to be able to make 100,000 artillery, 155 millimeter artillery shells a month by 2028. Right now, by next spring, we'll be making 57,000. So we're about halfway where we want to be in terms of artillery shell production. So there's a $1.5 billion funding initiative to get new plants up and start getting these things out. But like I said, this is all to keep up too with the Joneses because in a way, Russia now, which is kind of surprising, is producing more weapons than it was before the war. So like before the war, they were cranking out like 100 tanks a month. Now they're doing 200. So they've been able to ramp up their, because they are actually, again, they're actively at war. They're in a wartime economy.
Yeah, they had to, and they were clearing out all their old Soviet era stuff too.
Yeah, and it's not especially good stuff. Yeah, but it was a lot of surplus stuff or stuff that that they had kind of left over from the Cold War, and they're not really replacing it with new, better stuff. It's really hard for Russia to manufacture military equipment, or especially advanced military equipment. Again, with all the sanctions that are on them, they can do it, but what it means is importing things like electronics from Qatar and then deconstructing them, like getting smart appliances and taking the microchips out and then putting them in missiles. Like that's the kind of stuff that they have to do. They have to kind of go around and go the long way when it comes to producing especially advanced stuff. But you could see the arms race developing, and that kind of goes back to, again, the whole World War III idea. China is spending, a record amount on its military, and it doesn't even really tell us how much it's spending. We just know even the official numbers are astronomically high and rising. We're raising our own defense spending. All this is coming up.
Yeah, it seems like too. I mean, since COVID, there's been this push for the de-globalization, and it almost seems like they know, with the reshoring of chip manufacturing, it almost seems like the U.S. expects that, China's going to take Taiwan, and then we're not going to be able to get any chips over there.
I mean, it seems...
And so we better start building them over there. It's almost like, hey, give us a couple of years to, get our production up, and then go ahead and do your thing.
Or it's compromise. It's like so many things we've seen from China in the past. Like the big one people talk about is always like rare earth metals, because they produce such a huge portion of the Earth's rare earth metals, and we need those to manufacture these advanced components. Or it can be microchips or stuff like that. There are things that we rely on China for because its role for a long time is basically the world's manufacturing floor. Its ability to produce these things in great quantities at cheap cost, and then sell them to the West. And I think we've obviously come to realize that that's not healthy. That's not healthy for us as a country. It doesn't protect our national security. It's not good for the world to have China play such an outsized role in these really sensitive areas, these technological areas. And as we look at technology and the role it's playing going forward, and we're talking about stuff like AI playing a role in military weapons platforms, things are only going to get more technologically sophisticated from here. We're like I said, they're doing more AI platforms, but another big thing for the military is linking everything up in a giant cloud. They want every submarine and jet fighter and tank and infantry group and satellite connected all in one cloud so they can all instantaneously share information with each other autonomously. So, like, to do that, you need a tremendous amount of technology. You need to
Yeah,
go
and
produce this stuff.
and that's not something you want to have produced in
Yeah,
China.
that's not something you want to have produced in China.
You do not want something. So that's all. I mean, I know there's laws and regulations about like particular things having to be produced in the U.S. just for national security. One of the things I wanted to talk about was this new technology. I think you're calling it Project Wingman.
Oh yeah.
So, do you want to share a little bit about that? I kept thinking of just Top Gun,
Yes.
like the new era of Top Gun.
It kind of is, and so that's what I call it because it's a little bit catchier than collaborative combat aircraft, which is what the military calls it.
Yeah, they need better marketing.
Yeah, the military. Yeah. So like I call it Project Wingman. But what they've been doing, and this started as kind of like an experimental project these past few years, where they were pairing jet fighters up with companion aircraft that are drones. So, and they can deploy from any number of wings. Some are small enough that they can deploy from underneath a jet's wing like a missile would. Some of them are bigger and they're ground launched, but they just go up there with them. Others are meant to be like swarms that come out of basically the back of a cargo plane and attack like that. But they can provide a variety of functions. And like so they can fly ahead and scout out and identify and even neutralize like enemy anti-aircraft defenses. So if you're going to go on any kind of bombing run or try to take out any kind of targets, or you're approaching a hostile, well-defended area, you can send the drones in. Have them fly ahead, map everything out. Like I said, all that data goes back to the manned fighters, which, by the way, cost $70 to $80 million, whereas the drones only cost about $5 to $15 million, so they're attributable. You don't want to lose them, but you can. Like it's better than losing a $70 million plane and its pilot.
Yeah, well, we recently had was it an F-35 that went down?
Yeah, the guy jumped out of it.
Did they ever find it?
They found its wreckage. Yeah, they found it.
So I mean, that's basically gone right there.
Yeah.
So that's cool. So it seems like maybe the trend is, look, we don't need a fleet of these billion-dollar aircrafts that are manned by a person. Like maybe we'll have a couple, and then we kind of have these like autonomous drones that are in service of these main
things. And people
things.
have really seen just how effective drones have been in Ukraine. They absolutely I'm not gonna say obliterated because it still exists, but they hammered the Russian Black Sea Fleet with these things with like seaborne drones.
Well, they were sending them into Moscow.
Yeah, they were hitting Moscow with them. They've been hitting. They had some fighter jets just sitting out in an airfield, and they're taking them down with those. And like I said, you can take out military equipment of the magnitude of tens of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars with drones that only cost a few $1,000,000. The return on your investment there is huge. And, like I said, if you're the United States, pairing these things with manned groups makes sense because you do want to save those platforms. You also want to save the pilots, and you can have them out there performing a variety of functions. And what it really is, though, is it's going to basically be a stepping stone to a completely AI Air Force is ultimately the way it's going to be, because there's only something like 80 pilots even capable of flying a B-2 bomber. Okay, like it takes so much training. You have to be so like competent and so basically accomplished and really good at flying bombers and planes to even handle these things. And there just aren't that many pilots out there.
Right, and you spend all this money on training, and then they retire or whatever. Right. Whereas if you have a computer, it never retires. Right. It just gets faster and more capable.
What they've also found is that the computers are in fact better than the manned fighters. They've now this has still only been tested a few times in a variety of ways, but it's been happened all over the world. China's done it. China had a guy at a ground station operate an aerial drone and take out a bunch of Chinese fighter jets. Same thing happened in the United States. They put an entire squad of their best fighter pilots up against one AI pilot. The AI pilot wiped the floor with them, just absolutely destroyed them. And it's when you see it, you can kind of get it because, like, the human body and like your reaction time and the amount of mental calculations you have to make in a high intensity fast moving flight like that when you're going so fast and you're making all these maneuvers and it's you have to keep track of the target and you're looking all over, and then even when you lock on processing it and hitting the button and firing the munition, like the computer does that all instantaneously. I mean, there's no sensor to shooter timeline. As soon as it senses the target, it fires. There's no hesitation, there's no double checking, there's no like rubbing sweat out of your eye, there's nothing. It's just an instantaneous shot as soon as that happens. They're also capable of simply doing more. Like a human pilot, if you're flying, if you like once you get to like a gravitational of like 6 Gs, you're pretty much going to black out at that point within like a minute or two. Like you know like you can only go so fast in a plane before you pass out and your body can't take anymore. There's all kinds of videos on like YouTube and stuff of pilots like passing out. Like it's just what happens. But the planes they're flying are capable of going 2 or 3 times faster than that. They can pull 15 Gs if the pilot wasn't unconscious by that point.
Right.
So if instead you don't have that pilot there and it's just the AI flying it, they can do more. They can make the most out of that aircraft, whereas the human pilot kind of holds the technology back at this point. That's kind of where we're at. The technology has now exceeded human capability.
That's crazy. So there's no Top Gun 3 coming. You don't think?
Well, there's probably going to be a Top Gun 3. Like I don't see Hollywood losing its appetite for sequels anytime soon. Like as long as Tom Cruise is cashing checks, the last one was huge. Like, yeah. So I gotta think.
So it is interesting to bring up the basically the technology has outpaced humans. We can't talk about this without talking about the UAPs that have come up here. Yeah. So is that maybe what this is? Like people, is it alien like AI technology? Is how what's your take on that? Do the defense contractors have alien technology?
I'm certain they do. Like if it's me answering, I personally believe they do. Like I'm pretty deep on that stuff. Like I'm like, you know what? Roswell happened. They recovered an aircraft. They got stuff out of it. Like, and there was always.
But they don't really know what to make of it, I guess.
Well, the rumors is stuff that we got like fiber optics from it, that we got Kevlar from it, that there are certain like things that just popped up after that event that like kind of came out of nowhere and came out of like again government defense labs, which I research constantly, just for that reason because they are always on the forefront of these technological leaps. It seems whether or not they're getting it from aliens, I don't know. But, like, it's not implausible to me. Like, yeah, maybe they did. Maybe we did figure out, oh, wait, you could just shoot light through a glass, like, wire, like a bendable kind of glass wire, and that works maybe more effectively than a conductor, like a metal conductor. We can do this. We can do, like, all this. We have this material now. If you blend, these two metals, you get Kevlar or whatever it is. So I think they do, because why else would they be hiding it? I think... when we talk about, like, especially what's come out over the past few years where there's been a little bit, just like the smallest amount of transparency from the government in terms of releasing that, like, the jet fighter footage from the aircraft carrier off the coast of California and basically kind of going, like, okay, you're not crazy. There's something happening. There's stuff up there. We can't identify it. We don't know what it is. But you still know that's only a fraction of what they know. That's only a fraction. They didn't just come clean with us.
So is it, do you think it is alien stuff, or do you think it's other, like, top-secret military shit?
I think it's both.
It's both.
Like, it's got to be. I'm sure there's stuff they're working on that's extremely advanced. Like, I've read about some crazy stuff, all of it unsubstantiated, about, what they're trying to do with genes and gene cloning and making super soldiers. And there's a whole, dark kind of underbelly of, like, either this kind of rumor or conspiracy about secret clandestine programs the government's working on, kind of like a Stranger Things type.
Well, this congressional hearing testimony, I think the guy was named David Grush, like, came out and basically was like, I interviewed a bunch of people and they told me that, yeah, It's hidden, but he never actually like saw anything. He just talked to people that supposedly,
right, and
and then when the Congress, when the Congress is saying like, well, hey, and he's like, I can't tell you that because of like top secret shit or whatever, and then nothing really comes of it. So
right. I mean, that's kind of been where we've been with it for a while. I mean, no one's ever emerged with proof. Well, I guess I don't know. Maybe that professor in Mexico with the alien bodies.
Yeah, that's
like, I mean, but no one ever comes out with solid evidence. Like, yep, I smuggled out an alien corpse. Here it is, everybody. Here's the UFO, or here's part of it, or here is some like definitive footage and stuff that can be verified that shows all of the UFO, the secret UFO lab and site,
Right.
But I've also heard too, like people always kind of theorize that the U.S. military would not basically consolidate all that research in one space. That they would take pieces of the technology and leave it with different labs and just be like, hey, can you look at this and tell us what it is or what we might be able to do with it?
Right.
And then go to a different lab and ask them about something different or the same thing differently, and kind of have this kind of scattered approach to it where they never really clue anybody in on the big picture. They're always just working on a very small part.
A decentralized.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it's also possible that they have recovered something and it's crazy technology, but they're like, we have no idea how to reproduce it.
Undoubtedly,
or we need to do there's been talks of like, hey, like some of this stuff needs like to be created in space, and so like we don't have a manufacturer in zero gravity. The only way to make this is zero gravity, and we don't have manufacturer.
Yeah, you need a star yard.
Right, something like that. So I don't know. It's always interesting to think about that, specifically related to these defense stuff, because like they're in control, right? Like if Lockheed Martin has an alien spacecraft locked somewhere, like they I mean they're pretty much, and the government knows about it, like that's a contract for life, right?
Right.
Like they're not going to just be like, hey.
And it's monopoly on that.
Right.
I think that's kind of probably gets the core as to why we haven't had full-on disclosure in this area, why the government...
It's always national security, right?
It's always, hey, well, we can't tell you that because we want to maintain a monopoly on this technology, even if we don't know what to do with it, even when we don't know what it is, because either it gives us an edge where we can eventually maybe make a breakthrough and, China won't because they don't have a UFO that they recovered. But
it seems like it's like, how far away is U.S. technology from the rest of the world? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, now they're saying, that, like China got ahead of the U.S. in hypersonics.
Yeah,
like they're catching up. So if we had something locked away, like wouldn't we have some fucking badass cool shit already that they're like, what? Or is we're just waiting until
until the war, so World War III becomes a live fire war. We don't need that.
Okay, I'll buy that. Yeah.
Well, we don't need to break out the big guns yet. We can keep our alien laser rays under wraps and then surprise you with them, like when you go to try and take Taiwan, and all of a sudden we just blow you out of the water with an alien spacecraft that you had no idea we had.
Okay, I'll buy that. I'll buy that. I think that's a good note to end it on. So thanks for listening today, everyone.
Yeah, it's been
make
fun.
sure you like and subscribe. And if you do know anything about hidden alien spacecraft and military bases, let us know in the comments below.
Let us know. We do really enjoy talking about that.
Yeah, Simpkins he'll come out and vet it. And,
I will.
And we'll release it right here on the podcast.
If you got something you need me to look at, it's of alien origin, I'll be there. I'll make the trip out. I'll come see you.
All right. Take care.